Good day everyone, my name is Jed, I'm from Group 15, and today my group and I will be presenting on the topic of merits and demerits of Vote 18 in Malaysia and the UK's potential voting age reform, while also discussing two additional electoral reforms that will enhance the democratic processes in both countries. First of all, we'll start off with the introduction, moving on with merits and demerits, third, Malaysia reforms, fourth, the UK reform, and fifth, the conclusion. We'll start with our introduction. The issue of electoral reform is a fundamental aspect of any democratic society, aiming to ensure that the voice of every citizen is heard, and that the system remains inclusive and just. In this context, it is imperative to examine two distinct yet interrelated initiatives aimed at expanding the electorate: Malaysia Vote 18 and the United Kingdom's consideration of lowering the age to 16. Malaysia and the United Kingdom possesses unique electoral systems that influence how these reforms are approached. Malaysia, a constitutional monarchy with a parliamentary democracy, has experienced significant growth and modernization over the years. Its electoral system employs a first-past-the-post model for general elections and has seen increased attention towards inclusivity and fairness, exemplified by initiatives such as Vote 18. In contrast, the United Kingdom, a long-standing parliamentary democracy, has deliberated on lowering the voting age to 16, but the voting age for parliamentary elections remain at 18. It is essential to recognize that unique contexts and challenges each nation faces to make informed decisions about electoral reforms. Malaysia and UK's electoral system is based on the first-past-the-post model, which is also known as simple majority system. In this system, the country is divided into parliamentary constituency, each represented by a member of parliament, known as MP. During a general election, voters in each constituency cast their votes for a candidate, and the candidate with the most votes in that constituency becomes the MP for the area. The political party with the majority of MPs in the national parliament forms the government, and its leader becomes the Prime Minister. I will now be passing the presentation to my group members, starting with the merit of lowering the voting age in both UK and Malaysia positions.
Starting with the merits, which is lowering voting age boosts long-term participation in election. Dr. John Duraisingam of the University of Edinburgh School of Social and Political Science, lead author of the study, said allowing 16 and 17 years old to vote was a good decision taken by the Scottish Parliament. Many younger first-time voters retain a habit of voting and participate in greater number than older first-time voters. The findings strengthen the case for enfranchising younger voters across the UK to improve long-term voting behaviour. This wider enfranchisement implied the democratic benefits of greater participation, political accountability, and more responsive policymaking.
The first demerit is that young people under the age of 18 are not politically mature enough to participate in the electoral system, as they lack the ability and motivation to participate. According to an article named "Should the voting age be lowered to 16? Normative and Empirical Considerations" by Chan and Clayton, where they measure political maturity using political interest, party identification, political knowledge, and attitudinal consistency. They suggest that this difference cannot be explained by the UK's lack of the vote, as young people under 18 have no incentive to become involved in politics. Most of them are influenced by their parents' voting choices.
Moving on, I'll talk about the second demerit. The lowering of voting age added 5.8 million new voters, thereby enlarging the electorate to 21.02 million. This wider enfranchisement implied the democratic benefits of greater participation, political accountability, and more responsive policymaking. However, this development seemed to have worsened the long-existing problem in Malaysia of malapportionment, which refers to unequal political representation arising from large disparities in the size of electoral constituencies. Three effects followed this severe malapportionment: violation of fair election principles, poorer welfare outcomes, and lower inclination to vote in the supersized underrepresented constituencies. Politicians have higher incentive to devote attention and resources to smaller rural constituencies, where individual votes count more towards electoral outcomes. Votes in larger urban constituencies will see their votes as less consequential and become less inclined to turn out for voting.
For reforms in Malaysia, I would like to bring your attention to the issue of unfair redelineation in Malaysia, which are reformed by withdrawing constituency value. Redelineation, a process of defining electoral boundaries, is an essential component of any democratic system with the aim of ensuring voters receive a fair representation of their voting preference, irrespective of their geographic or demographic characteristics. In Malaysia, this process is guided by the 13th schedule of the Constitution. Unfair redelineation practices, including gerrymandering, have been a source of concern in Malaysia. Gerrymandering involves manipulating electoral boundaries to favor a particular political party or group, resulting in unequal representation. The Coalition for a Clean and Fair Election Versailles 2.0 has pointed out that the past irregularities could persist and worsen over time without redelineation. Distortion in electoral outcomes are potential consequences of unfair practices. While redelineation intends to be a fair and impartial process, there are some parties opposing it, arguing that it can be manipulated for political advantage. For instance, Bukit Gasing Assemblyman Rajiv Rishakaran expressed concern that the redelineation would favor BN, which is Barisan Nasional, political coalition in Selangor during the 14th general election. This concern centers on the potential for a certain party winning in an electoral district with fewer votes, undermining the principle of equal representation. Malaysia's previous redelineation effort has raised concern about the effectiveness in addressing imbalance in voters' distribution amongst constituencies. In some instances, these efforts may have exacerbated existing inequalities. Critics argue that the process was rushed, controversial, and seemed to favor certain political parties, most notably the Barisan Nasional. A significant example is the situation in Johor Bahru, where many undersized and oversized constituencies remain untouched by the redelineation process, serves as a poignant example of the challenges that need to be addressed. Thus, the first reform is to redraw boundaries to achieve an equal population distribution among constituencies by making sure they are drawn in a way that is fair and just. This entails a comprehensive review of the existing boundaries and the adjustment of district sizes to ensure that each vote carries an equal weight regardless of where a citizen reside. Reforms should be addressed both population disparities and the legacy of gerrymandering. A critical part of the reform process should be ensuring equal representation through a strict attention of both geographic variables such as land area and demographic factors including population density and living space. One of the principles of fair redelineation is geographic compactness. This means that constituencies should be designed with a focus on creating compact, geographically coherent districts. Such districts are more representative of the communities that encompass and prevent the creation of irregularly shaped or sprawling constituency. By avoiding excessive spreading out, compact districts contribute to the integrity of representation. Large land areas may necessitate larger constituencies, but should be manageable for elected representatives. Conversely, smaller geographic regions may require smaller constituencies but should not be manipulated for political advantage. At the same time, demographic considerations such as population density and living space are equally vital to ensure fair representation. High-density areas may warrant smaller constituencies, while lower-density regions may require larger ones to avoid underweighted representation. To strike this balance, modern tools like Geographic Information System (GIS) and demographic analysis are invaluable, helping delineators create boundaries that are both geographically coherent and demographically equitable, fostering equal access and fair representation for all citizens. To conclude, it is evident that existing unfair redelineation process in Malaysia have undermined the principle of equitable representation in Malaysia, leading to imbalances in voter distribution and challenges to the principle of fairness and equity. A fair redelineation process are vital to ensure that every citizen votes holds equal weight and that the electoral system respects the principle of democracy.
Moving on to the second reform, I would like to present on increasing women's political representation. Female political representation in Malaysia is dismally low when compared to other areas of achievement, like in economic, education, and health sectors attained by Malaysian women. Civil society in Malaysia has been fighting for gender equality and women's welfare for decades, and female party leaders have also contributed over time to the improvements of women's rights and well-being. In the general election held in 1999, the feminist organizations had supported the late Saidul Muhammad Qasim as a candidate for gender rights to contest within the framework of opposition Barisan Alternative. Even though she was unsuccessful, the initiative had brought about an increase in political awareness and the importance of political representation to fight for women's issues. What is symbolically important is the bipartisan nature of the joint declaration by the Women's MP. This united voice demonstrates an emerging consensus among women politicians on the need to promote an enabling environment for an increased role of women's participation in politics. One of the contributing factors for the low percentage of elected women representatives is simply due to the fact that not enough of them were nominated by political parties. The table lists only political parties which had been nominated at least one female candidate and had won a minimum of one seat, indicating that only 3 parties among them had fielded 20% or more women candidates, which is Parti Keadilan Rakyat People Justice Party (PKR), Parti Pesaka Bumi Putra Bersatu, United Bumi Putra Heritage Party (PBP), and Parti Bersatu Sabah United Sabah Party (PBS). A comparison of the success rate of candidates by gender also overturns the stereotype that female candidates are not winnable. Firstly, we can start by evaluating electoral system reform to ensure a more balanced gender parliamentary representation. The Electoral Reform Committee proposed for a 30% female quota through the introduction of the closed list proportional representation system. Under the closed list system, candidates are elected according to their pre-stated position on this list. The first past the post system is heavily dependent on party commitment. It is usually unfavorable to a higher female representation as parties tend to field more male candidates. However, when changing to a closed list proportional system, often a gender quota can be integrated into the proportional representation system to ensure a minimum female representation in tackling women's representation through CLPR. The enforcement of gender quota in the party list of candidates by inserting one female after every 2 male candidates can certainly provide an instant and effective impact to increase women lawmakers in the parliament. However, as repeatedly pointed out, this would be an important step, but it is insufficient in addressing gender inequality that is still prevalent in popular culture and in politics. For instance, the memberships of some smaller parties remain male-dominated despite their willingness to promote gender equality in political participation. Hence, the introduction of gender quota may be disadvantageous to such parties. On the other hand, not adopting the closed list proportional representation system under the first past the post system, the more commonly used approach is the voluntary adoption of gender quota by political parties. The Labour Party in the UK has been successful in achieving gender parity in their parliament representation through a policy of using all-women shortlists. Perhaps some form of legislation or policy tools which oblige political parties to progressively field at least 30% female candidates could help to provide an added impact in Malaysia. Here again, the role of electoral reform activists is crucial in naming and shaming political parties which have clearly not demonstrated any political will and effort to improve their performance over time in this respect. Moving on, the most straightforward way to increase women lawmakers is to carry out an effective campaign to put more pressure on political parties to nominate a minimum of 30% female candidates and to publicize and shame those who did not do so. While some small parties may not be able to nominate more women candidates due to their skewed membership, there is really no excuse for established parties whose gender ratio of membership are balanced not to be able to do so. Parties need to be taking conscious measures to ensure that 30% of their elected top party leaderships are female. This demonstrates the commitment of these parties to give more room for more capable women in the party to rise to the occasion. The experience and lessons derived from the implementation of various gender empowerment programs could offer a lot of lessons and experiences in addressing this issue to move forward. For example, the adoption of Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women in 1995 had given Malaysia government some motivation to look into institutional and legal provisions in relation to the protection of women's rights and interests. Next, the adoption of the 9th Malaysia 5-year plan 2006 to 2010 made a commitment to increase women's representation in decision-making positions in the civil service to 30%. The plan also outlined efforts to appoint more women as local councillors. The activists and vanguards pioneering these initiatives have repeatedly reminded that gender quota, if used, can only be a complement to much greater groundworks that are needed to transform cultural and societal attitudes towards the social role of women. The government here needs to play a stronger role in allocation of resources and appropriate policies to create an enabling environment for women MPs.
Next, moving on to the possible reform in UK, our first suggestion is to equalise electorates for each constituency. David Cameron, representing Conservative Party, proposed in 2009 that the number of MPs should be cut from 650 to 585 and that constituency electorates should be equalised across the UK. They currently tend to be lower in Wales, Northern Ireland and in urban areas. To implement these changes, a boundary review under new rules reviews should be conducted. Recently, in 2011, the coalition government passed legislation that committed to reducing the number of parliamentary constituencies in the UK from 650 to 600, mainly in Wales and inner cities. It also sought to make the size of parliamentary constituencies more even while putting a roughly equal number of electors in each constituency. Under the Parliamentary Constituencies Act 1986, as amended by the Boundary Commissions Act 1982, the Boundary Commissions of England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland are required to conduct simultaneous general review of all constituencies every 8 to 12 years. The Boundary Commissions have to ensure that new constituency electorates are as close as possible to the electoral quota, the average number of electorals per constituency. The electoral quota for the 5th General Review was 69,935 for England and Scotland, 55,640 for Wales and 60,969 for Northern Ireland. There are additional rules regarding local authority boundaries, total number of seats and special geographical considerations. There were large disparities in constituency electorates at the 2010 general election. The largest constituency was the Isle of Wight with 109,902 electors, more than 5 times as the smallest one, which is 21,780 in Na Elena Alat. The Act sets out a number of rules in Schedule 2 which are relevant to the detailed development of proposals for individual constituencies. Among these is Rule 2, which provided that apart from 5 specified exceptions, every constituencies were recommended must have an electorate that is not less than 95% and not more than 105% of the UK electoral quota. The UK electoral quota for the 2023 review is to the nearest whole number of 73,393. Accordingly, every recommended constituencies, except for the 5 protected constituencies, must have an electorate that is not smaller than 69,724 and no larger than 77,062 electorates per constituencies. One reason why the government wants to equalize electoral constituency size is to correct for a perceived electoral bias. Electoral bias will be especially evident if one party tends to win in seats with below average electorate, while another tends to win where electorates are above average size. A clear example will be a party can secure 2 seats for winning 2 constituencies with 35,000 people, but another party secure 1 seat for winning a single constituency with 70,000 people. To illustrate, Labour benefits in respect of electoral size bias, especially in England, because they have had to fit constituencies into local government map and not across country and borrowed boundaries unless disparities between neighbouring constituencies are extreme. Areas with small entitlements may get smaller seats than the average, with most of those are in urban areas, where Labour tends to be a stronger party. Of the 312 constituencies that Labour won in 1997 and 2001 and again in 2005, the average electorate remained consistent at around 67,000, whereas in the 154 constituencies won by the Conservative, at all 3, it increased from 81,700 and finally reached 85,000 at the 2005 election. In terms of the legal structure of electoral processes, the central aspect that must be analysed are the effects of any of the possible ways of dividing the national territory in the fulfilment of the universal constitutional principle that demands an equal value of each vote, the principle of one person, one vote. This principle allows the vote of each citizen to exert an equal influence on the forming of the representation, regardless of the constituency in which they assert their right to vote. As a consequence, if the system is uninominal, constituencies must be designed in such a way that they have the same numbers of voters. To give a better image of the importance of equal value of each vote, in the 2019 election, it took 26,000 votes for SNP to win a seat, compared with over 800,000 for Green Party. Labour had to gain over 50,000 votes to elect each MP, while the Conservative needed only 38,000. The concept of proportional representation did not achieve in which each vote has equal value and everyone has an equal voice, wherever we live and whoever we vote for. It would take roughly the same number of votes to elect each individual MP, whichever party they happen to belong to. Thus, from the data and statistics mentioned above, we can conclude that the UK electoral system, first past the post, will have room for improvement in order to achieve the result of fair voting.
The topic of discussion will be proportional representation for all, the second reform in the United Kingdom. It has been argued that the United Kingdom's electoral system does not fully represent the minority interests and the smaller parties. While the results map can only have one colour per constituency, in reality you will never find a town where everyone is the same. Westminster one-person-takes-all system makes everything black and white, hiding the many areas of agreement. Every issue becomes a stick to defeat an opponent rather than something to be solved on the advantage of all. The sides can vary according to the system. ranging from the size of the whole country to a county or village. That's the core idea of proportional representation, which means you have a team of MPs, which is the member of parliament that reflect the strength of the different political opinions in your area. According to Vernon-Bogneto, voting systems are divided into three categories: proportional, majority, and plurality. He claims that proportional representation is actually a genetic phrase identifying a variety of distinct systems that share only a common aim of proportionality between seats and votes under the category of proportional system, while there exists a range of different systems. According to a Redfield and Wilton strategies research, the majority of UK citizens, 54%, would be in favour of switching from the existing first-past-the-post voting system to a proportional representation system. Only a small minority were against or highly opposed, while 22 were neither in favour nor against, and 9% were unsure. The United Kingdom's current voting system, first-past-the-post, is regarded unrepresentative owing to its leaning towards the top two parties. This system discriminates against smaller parties like the Liberal Democrats, Green Party of England and Wales, and the British National Party, who have significant support but struggle to build a top-of-the-poll position in specific local areas. Despite the improvement in regions, they remain underrepresented. Moving to proportional representation system in the UK may offer minority parties and independent candidates a better chance of winning seats in parliament. It could be argued that proportional representation delivers fairer treatment of minority and independent candidates. According to research by Electoral Reform Society, they has used voter registration data to find that 4.2 million potential voters in Scotland have the chance to secure fair representation, alongside 2.3 million potential voters in Wales and 6.1 million potential voters in London. As such, over 12 million voters have a powerful voice today. With proportional representation used in Wales, Scotland, and on the London Assembly, elections to the Welsh Senate, Scottish Parliament, and London Assembly all use the additional member system, a proportional voting system that ensures seats elected more closely match how people vote. The system is a glowing contrast to Westminster's outdated one-party-takes-all system of first-past-the-post. Voters being represented in proportion to their number is at the heart of what modern democracy should look like, with a strong voice for the public plus a stronger role for cooperation and working together. Proportional representation has been doing its job effectively in Scotland for decades now, and voters benefit hugely from it. The political diversity in the nation is testament to all voters being heard. At its core, proportional representation is about a simple principle. In a democracy, seats should be matched how people actually vote. This simple principle is cast aside at Westminster, leading to chaotic lottery elections where a small national swing can lead to wildly different outcomes. Ministers ought to be considering ways to strengthen the democracy, such as striking away with one-party system of voting and finally granting the people proportional representation. As a result, millions of voters can cast their ballots with confidence, knowing that their votes will actually count. It demonstrates how some of the major issues with winner-take-all voting are addressed by a more equitable voting method. Voters deserve to be heard wherever they are.
In conclusion, the evidence and arguments presented in the discussion highlights the potential benefit of lowering the voting age, addressing the issue of equalizing constituency, and implementing proportional representation in the context of improving democratic participation and representation. It also strengthens the case for considering similar reforms across the UK, as it can lead to greater political accountability and be more responsive in policy making. As seen in the case of Malaysia, creates significant disparities in the distribution of political power among constituencies, favouring smaller rural areas and underrepresenting urban ones. This not only distorts the democratic process but also discourages youth participation, as their votes appear to have less impact in underrepresented constituencies. As can be seen in both Malaysia and UK, the disparities within each constituency was the main concern. Therefore, equalizing the size of the constituency can be seen as a crucial reform that needs to be taken into consideration, as this can promote a fairer electoral system. Increasing women's political representation is crucial as we encourage gender equality. The push for proportional representation in the UK is driven by the need to ensure that minority interests and smaller parties have a fair chance of winning seats in Parliament. Overall, these proposed reforms align with the principle of fairness, equality, and inclusivity, which are centered to the concept of democracy. While each reform may face its challenges and opposition, they are all contributed to the ongoing evolution of the democratic systems, with the aim of making them more responsive, representative, and accountable to the diverse needs and voices of the citizens they serve. That's it from Group 15. Thank you and have a nice day.